Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Palestine Land Studies Center and the Center for Arab and Middle Eastern Studies, I'm Sari Hanafi, the director of the CAMS. So I'm honored to have you today for a talk on transformations in post-war liberalism, Zionism, and the restoration of colonial liberalism. Look, Mohammad Fadel, hopefully will join us in a few minutes, wrote an article 6 months ago where I found it amazing comparing to mainstream debate. Today you find it worldwide that the problem of the transformation of Zionism, that it has been transformed into religious one. And here where you have the problem. So you have a kind of secularist trend continue to flourish through the writing of scholars like, for instance, the Israeli historian Eli Barnavi or Gilles Kepel, just in an interview in L'Express a few months ago, where they argue that there is a conflict today between two religious nationalist movements, Hamas/Islamic Jihad from the Palestinian side, and the Israeli religious parties from the other side. So, they couldn't criticize Israel as a secular state, but the excess of some political fringes. So Keppel even go further to analogize Hamas to Al-Qaeda and ISIS and comparing 7 October to 11 September. So this is why I found the article of Mohammad Fadel very interesting, entitled Beyond Liberal Zionism. Okay, so sorry, 1 minute, he is with us. Muhammad. Yeah, so we are waiting for you. Can you enter to the link? Yeah, we are waiting, please. So, okay, yeah, right. No, it's now. We started. I am introducing the speakers. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. So can you, yeah, ciao, bye. Yeah, okay. So he will be with us. He thought 1 hour later. Okay, so his article is Beyond Liberal Zionism, International Law, Political Liberalism, and the Possibility of a Just Zionism. So, around this article, our center, would like to have this debate. So I'm so honored. Also, in addition of Mohammad Bami, we will have him from Canada. We'll have two discussants. So let me introduce the panelists, and of course, after that, we will have a Q&A. So Mohammad Fadel, he's a professor at the Faculty of Law at the University of Toronto, who joined in 2006. His PhD was about legal process in medieval Islamic law in Chicago University, but also he received a Juris Doctor from the University of Virginia School of Law. He has a long career as a lawyer, as a jurist, a member of Bar of New York since 2000. He worked in a different U.S. court. But I have known Professor Fadel through his amazing work on Islamic legal history, but also the way of thinking Islam and liberalism in a particular way, I would say. So we have two discussants. Ardi Imseis, in my left. He is a scholar and practitioner of public international law. He joined the Queen's Faculty of Law in 2018, and actually after a 12-year of career in UN, as a UN official in the Middle East, in UNRWA, in the UNHCR, and as well, he has a really long, protracted, I would say, career as a jurist in a different United Nations commissions in the different places, from Yemen to Palestine to other places. I was so delighted, Ardi, that we had you yesterday, thanks always to Zeina, to discuss your book, The United Nations and the Question of Palestine, Rules by Law and the Structure of International Legal Subalternity, which was published 2 years ago in Cambridge University Press. The second discussant, we have Dr. Zeina Jallad. She's a director of the Palestine Land Studies Center and an assistant professor in international law here at UB. Her research focuses on human rights, international law, and sustainability, with a particular emphasis on the Arab region. Dr. Jallad has 2 decades of experience working with the UN across the MENA region, Switzerland, and Laos, including Syria. I mean, this is where I was delighted to know that you were involved in the UN Commission about Syria. So she holds a Doctor of Science of Law from Columbia University. She is a member of both the Palestinian Bar and the New York Bar, and she is served as a senior advisor to the UN Special Rapporteur on the right of the food, and sit in the board of trustees at Beirut University. So as you see today, we will have a kind of a legal and international law perspective on discussing question of Zionism. So Mohammad, we wish you with us in Beirut, but waiting for that, we'll have you only virtually. So you have the floor.
Sari, thank you for this introduction and for arranging this this session. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we need to speak up, please. Can you?
Okay, let me. Yeah. Okay, I'll try to speak louder. Okay, the people on the I'm getting thumbs up from various audience members, so I assume that I'm clear. So. And then, first of all, I'm really excited to see my old, I don't know to call her a student, Zeina, because I met Zeina in 2011 in Syracuse, I believe. She was still doing her PhD, so it's great to see her again. And of course, my dear colleague and friend, Ardi, whom I've learned so much from, and was delighted to be able to host at the Faculty of Law last year to give a talk on his great book. So I think one question is, why talk about law at all? Clearly, it seems that law doesn't have any, does not restrain Israel in the least, nor does it seem to restrain the United States in its support of Israel, particularly now under the Trump administration, where there's not even lip service for the law. So I understand that a lot of people would be extremely cynical to say about international law, about law in general. And from my perspective, I completely understand why people would have that approach and have that attitude. They could say rightly, well, international law has been on our side.
Mohammad, we have a small technical problem. I beg you, if you can raise your voice until we resolve it. So we hear you, but hardly. Yeah, so if you can really
Does it make a difference
raise
if
your
I speak
voice.
through my mic?
the-
Does it make a difference if I speak through my mic?
yeah,
It's almost speakers, isn't it?
no, you need to speak up a little bit more. I mean,
Because I normally WebEx, and so I'm just wondering if the connections are different because it's WebEx rather than Zoom. Okay, I'll just try to yell. I mean, um, so I understand if there's a lot of cynicism about law, right? We could say that Palestinians have had rights under international law since the end of World War I that have been systematically ignored and subverted, and now are on the verge of complete extinguishment, or at least that's what the United States seeks to do apparently in the Trump administration. So what's the point of making an appeal to law in this circumstance? Well, I think part of the answer lies in why law has failed the Palestinians over the last century. So you can think of law as having two dimensions, a normative dimension and then a sociological dimension. The sociological dimension being the real political forces on the ground that are willing to uphold the principles of the law. And it's there that Palestinians have been have had a very difficult time, because in the centers of power, first in Great Britain and now in the United States, political forces on the ground are arrayed against them. It makes it very difficult politically in Great Britain during the interwar period, United States in the post-World War period, to assemble political coalitions that are capable of vindicating the legal rights of Palestinians, because there are strong political coalitions in favor of Zionism. And so, what tools do we have? Is the only way we can protect Palestine, unfortunately, is to change the politics in the great powers themselves, most importantly, the United States. And so this is why I think we have to remain committed to the ideal of rule of law. Because the ideal of rule of law allows us to assemble a political coalition, or attempt to assemble a political coalition, that can effectively resist Zionist colonialism. And so this is where it's very important to have a legal analysis of what Zionism seeks to do. From a legal perspective, Zionism seeks to overthrow the accomplishments of 20th century international law and return us to a 19th century world in which international law is determined basically by strong do what they can and the weak do what they must. Now that principle, of course, has been utterly repudiated by developments in 20th century international law. And it's a principle that most people are willing to rally around, right? Or a lot of people are willing to rally around. And that's why it's very important, I think, for us to engage in the kinds of law-based critiques of Israel that I try to do, that Ardi does, in the hope, not that we are going to persuade Zionists, but in the hope that we can persuade non-Zionists that this project is not only genocidal of Palestinians, it also threatens the very viability of a peaceful world order, because its premise repudiates the possibility of peace. Instead, posits a world of constant conflict and strife and survival of the fittest. Right? So it's a reintroduction of ideas of colonial liberalism, that only successful, quote unquote, successful states have any sorts of rights, and they can impose their will on the lessers of the human race, right? And of course, that inevitably leads to the conflicts that we saw in the 20th century. Because as great powers go around the world pursuing their interests, everybody trying to make itself great again, right? You are inevitably going to lead to war. And that war will be disastrous to everybody. So I have no illusions about the possibility of converting Zionists en masse, although I do imagine that there are some that will realize that this is untenable and can be persuaded that legal arguments will be persuasive to them. But the main point is that it provides us, or at least my hope, is that it provides us a basis for establishing a broad coalition that goes beyond ourselves, beyond Arabs, right? Beyond Muslims, beyond people in the Middle East, to create a truly global coalition to stop this monstrous project that is now in occupied Palestine. So that's kind of what has motivated the work. The specific article that Sadi invited me to comment on is an attempt to engage in some kinds of debates with liberal Zionists who are prominent in the public sphere, and try to show, and I try to show in that article, that even if they aren't bigoted toward Palestinians the way Nazis are bigoted toward Jews, for example, nevertheless, liberal Zionists share with chauvinist Zionism the same idea that Palestinians lack any rights in Palestine. And that's the fundamental problem, that because of their inability to recognize any kind of deontic rights that Palestinians have, that even their modest solutions, which are really no more than apartheid, even that is impossible, right? They're incapable of restraining the Smotriches of the world, because if you push a little deeper, there's really no principal difference between them and Smotrich. Because the only difference between a liberal Zionist and Smotrich is their perception of exogenous restraints on the state of Israel. Smotrich says, we can do whatever they want, we can do whatever we want, and the world will not stop us. Liberal Zionists are worried that the world might stop them. But as we've seen for the last 15 months, Smotrich is right. As of now, the world will not stop them. And because that has sort of been demonstrated empirically and through experience, what we know from the history of Zionism is they will continue to push until the world stops them. And so, as a lawyer, the only thing I can do is raise the alarm, tell people this is what's going to happen, and it's not just Palestinians that are going to be eliminated. All of us are going to lose. The idea of a global community is at risk here unless this comes to an end. So I will stop here and look forward to the comments of Ardi and Zeina.
Thank you so much, Mohammad. And I will give the floor now to Ardi and then to Zeina. Go ahead, Ardi.
Hello, Mohammad. How are you? Can you hear me, brother?
I can hear you fine.
Wonderful. It's good to see you, my dear friend. You actually make a compelling case for why it is important to engage in this question. And if I can just restate what you say, it is aimed at not necessarily converting the Zionist, liberal or otherwise, but it is a tactical move to shore up support for Palestine where it matters, ideally in the United States and other places, centers of power that are determinative for the Palestinian people for reasons outside of their control. I appreciate that very much. I didn't quite get that, however, from the paper itself, which I read very closely, or at least I thought, so I might have missed stuff over the past 3 or 4 days. What I did think was that it was a clear and very well-written attempt to help imagine a better future for Israel and Palestine at a time, unlike any other time before, frankly, that hope is as needed as it is in short supply. The essence of your argument is that, at least as I understood it, is that for all of its ills, liberal Zionism can be redeemed through a proper application of a Rawlsian political liberalist approach, which takes as its foundation equality of all before the law. That's what I understood. I thought you were very adept at using Klein and Gavison's respective work as your entry point into the so-called world view of the liberal Zionist, and you undermine them rather nicely by applying the Rawlsian framework to say, hey, look, you guys really aren't liberal. And as you suggest just now in your remarks, there is a thin line, if any line, between the right-wing Zionist and the liberal Zionist. It's all window dressing, in effect, which you would acknowledge. And yet, despite all of that, which I think it's a useful discussion and to have, there are a number of problems that jump out at me that you may very well want to take into account as you work this up, which I suspect you will do, because if it's on SSRN, you're going to be publishing it somewhere sometime soon. And the first one is the question of time. I think I texted you last week and I said, look, I haven't read your piece yet, but based on the title, I truly wonder whether or not we've been here before. Is this a case of deja vu all over again, right? And I recall reading in the immediate aftermath of Oslo in the early 90s, similar pieces. They didn't write in the same depth and certainly not in the same mastery of the legal and political philosophy of Rawls and others as you do. But I thought of people like Rashid Khalidi, who were attempting, people like him were trying to engage in a bridging narrative between the Zionists on the one hand and the Palestinians on the other, with the aim of perhaps one day finding a brighter future at the rendezvous of victory, to quote Aimé Césaire. And for all of their good intentions, we now know where all of that led. And so I wondered whether or not your paper at this time was an appropriate thing to engage with. This time, a time of complete and utter tumult, a time where the Palestinian people existentially don't have a guarantee of their continuation, a time of genocide. What obligation the Palestinian people or their allies, Egyptian and others, do they have to be magnanimous in trying to redeem a liberal Zionism for the benefit ultimately not only of the Zionists but for the Palestinians? And so it struck me as odd that in this time when Palestinians are trying to just simply hold on, quite literally for dear life, that we collectively in this conversation, and you perhaps as a scholar, should concern yourself with whether or not liberal Zionism can be, in the end, redeemed. My second concern. I actually don't think, much like you intoned a few minutes ago, that there is such a thing as liberal Zionism. To my mind, these two things are mutually exclusive. And I say this not merely as an opinion, but I do believe as an ontological fact based on an examination of the historical record. What is the experience and what has been the experience of the Palestinian people at the hands of the political Zionists since 1885? Well, I think the historical record is very clear in that regard, and that is that they have consistently, without let or hindrance, without fail, been on the receiving end of a type, character, and quality of violence that wishes them away. That is to say, there has never, in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, actually existed in real terms as manifested in day-to-day existence of the Palestinian people anything remotely close to liberal Zionism. And so I wondered whether or not we can even speak of it in real terms, or if this is something that exists, and it may very well, in the minds and in the bubbles of the Northeast United States and in the elite institutions at law schools that you and I teach at and speak at with all of these people who would like to enjoy their cake and eat it too. They're liberal, they're Zionists, they live on the Upper West Side of New York, and they believe in equal rights, but goodness gracious, if the Palestinians come anywhere near where they live, they'll be the first to cut and run. My third point, and my last point, I wonder whether or not you actually take Palestine seriously as a result. Epistemologically, you know that the work that I do makes a very important point, or at least I like to think, that in order to understand the question of Palestine, one need not look at it, indeed one must not look at it as though it is a situation that involves two protagonists, both equal in claim and virtue. There is one protagonist that is a victim in the question of Palestine, and it is the Palestinian people. And again, I see no reason, no earthly purpose to engage in an attempt to redeem something called liberal Zionism when the Palestinian people are on the receiving end of Zionist guns, bullets, genocidal calls, the smearing of these people as Amalek and the rest. It really makes very little sense to me, and it's because we need all the help that we can get. Now, tactically, I see, and my fear is that by engaging in this type of inquiry, you're actually helping the others, that is to say the Zionists, engage in fictitious hope, to make it seem as though that they have something to offer the world other than what in fact the result of many, many decades of their work is now coming to fruition on the backs of Palestinian men and women and children, the destruction of the Palestinian people. So I ask the following question as a thought experiment, and then I'll leave it to you to answer or to take it to Zeina, and then we can carry on. Here's the thought experiment. Dear friends, comrades, would it be okay for an English scholar writing in 1942 a paper that attempts to address a purported liberal or egalitarian or equitable strand of German National Socialism in order to envision a future Germany where all, Gentile and Jew, could live as equals? Likewise, would it be okay for that same English scholar, hypothetical, to write in 1975 to the world about the liberal strands of South African Afrikaner nationalism and the apartheid ideology that might be redeemed, say the quest for the Afrikaner people to speak their own language or to have their own culture, things that might be redeemed in the view of the hope that somehow in the future black and white alike might live together as one. Would you regard any of those two examples as reasonable things to engage with in those respective dates? And if the answer is no, I think you can get a sense of where I'm going with this. I should like to thank you, Mohammad, as ever, for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ardi Imseis, for this very important discussion. I think, I don't know. Okay. So, okay. And I give the floor, maybe Muhammad, I will give the floor to Zeina Jallad, and then you will have the opportunity to discuss both of them. Okay? Okay, so, okay.
Marhaba, Professor Fadel. It's such a pleasure to be here in the same room with friends, colleagues, and dear friends, old colleagues, and you guys, and mentor. And thanks a lot for this intellectually stimulating work and thought-provoking also project that I share with Ardi the question of time and space and kind of intellectual space that we want to engage with. And what does it, like I think I would just move straight to the kind of questions that I would like us to engage with in this discussion, which is how much of work, like you've laid a bit now the ground for where did this project come from and what was the engagement that you were aiming at. My thinking was, throughout reading the article, was the very contemporary recent history of pre-October 7th, with all the protests across Israel and in Tel Aviv for more than 35 weeks. So I'm thinking about the project as a project and thinking about the project in relevance to Palestinians. And what would the reimagination or the legal imagination of Zionism as a just Zionism would deliver for the Palestinian people? And a more direct kind of question, one of the key aspects of the Palestinian plight is the question of return. Like if we want to put just Zionism in practice and try to entertain it as a possibility, what would be the scenario of return in a just Zionist model, for example? If we want to take it like beyond where I concur with Ardi, I was just trying to see like how we can push this compelling and thought-provoking argument of if we want to unpack just Zionism and try to see how we can make it work for us Palestinians, because if this model could provide any possibility or has a possibility to go beyond intellectual exercise, like the question of return, how would it look like? Especially like now, yesterday we discussed your book, and the two of you come with your argument on the legal subalternity, the work of the UN, how did the UN stabilized or worked on managing the Palestinian plight that was never the making of the Palestinian people. And here we're trying to look beyond the liberal Zionism, how a just Zionism might provide a kind of a window for a light for a possibility of a solution. Then if we want to take it to translate it into possibilities for the Palestinian people, especially like in light of today's world, like with the ICC arrest warrants, with the ICJ, how can we try to imagine a just Zionism today in practice? Like what would a just Zionism look like with the Netanyahu arrest warrants? What would a just Zionism look like with the return? And take it to the hollowing out of international law. The US is exiting international law. So how would a just Zionism look like when the US is exiting international law or attacking international law mechanisms? Or like would the Zionists in New York think about the UN and international law in a different way? Would this allow them to reconsider the value of international law, or anyway they have walked out of international law, so a just Zionism might provide them with a kind of a new rhetoric. So I would like to engage with you in the imagination more of how we can think about a just Zionism from a return, ICC, international plane, international law aspects. And maybe I have another follow-up, but we can do this later. But for now, I'd like us to have the combo of the two with your project and think about it. But thank you again. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Mohammad, would you like to reply, or you allow me two, 3 words before?
I'm happy to. I think you're inviting me to respond.
Yeah.
For some
Okay.
reason, Sari,
Okay,
you're
go
the
ahead.
worst. I can hear Zeina and Ardi fine, having a harder time hearing you. But let me just respond, because I think you're inviting me to respond. I'll try to respond very quickly. First of all, I think Ardi's comments are excellent. I want to give a defense. First, I think the way I envision the article, can you hear me? Okay. The way I envision the article that you read, Ardi, is that it should also be read with another piece that I published in the Virginia Journal of International Law called Lawmaking, Lawbreaking, and the Foundations of International Law, which sort of speaks about the need for developing effective coalitions to vindicate legal principles. In any case, even though the article is addressed at liberal Zionists, there's a very good reason why I'm publishing it in a student-edited law journal, because I want students to read it. I want it, as I said, it's a completely derivative article. I use your work, I use Victor's work, I use the works of great Palestinian scholars, right? But the problem is those works are always in very specialized journals. I wanted to write a piece that would circulate in a more general interest journal. So it's coming out in the Journal of Contemporary Law and Transnational Problems, something like that, from the University of Iowa College of Law. And so that's basically sort of the publishing strategy and why there's a tactical dimension to this, right? Even though it's addressing specifically liberal Zionism, the audience and choice of publication is intended to be much wider, right? So that's kind of that. Now, in terms of timing, I agree. It's totally inappropriate given the gravity, the monstrosity of what's happening to the Palestinian people. Of course it's inadequate. No doubt about it. Zero. But I'm asking, what can I do as a law professor at the University of Toronto? La hawla li wa la quwwa. The only thing I have is my pen. The only thing I can try to do is persuade my countrymen in the United States to stop killing Palestinians. And I can only do it in the language that I think is going to resonate with them. Of course, the Palestinians are the victim, and of course, political Zionism is a wicked movement, no doubt about it, right? But this is also the dilemma in adopting a Rawlsian methodology. So Rawls, philosophically, right, sort of demands that we don't adopt the full truth, so to speak. We restrict ourselves to the political conception, and we try to seek a common ground, right? Of course, absolute justice would demand something else. But on the other hand, I will hear Jews say, well, absolute justice demands what with respect to the Pale of Settlement and what to respect to Germany. So if we go down the path of absolute justice, we have, an infinite regress of historical crimes. As a practical matter, the only thing I was restating, I believe, was exactly what Arabs were telling the Jews in the 30s. Let's live together in a democratic state. You have your rights as a minority, but we live together as equals, right? That's a perfectly principled, Rawlsian, democratic solution to the problem of Palestine. What we have to do is create a political coalition that will give that effect. That's how I view my role, right? But I take everything you say. Yes, there's no attempt to redeem liberal Zionism here, right? There's a polite language that's being taken based on sort of hope rather than experience. The hope that people could still be persuaded to become better, right? I mean, I don't know how we can live without that sort of hope in a better future, right? That's actually one of the reasons why Rawls wrote the way he did. If you read his introduction, he concludes by saying that one of the reasons why the Nazis succeeded in Germany was the death of hope. And Zionism is the death of hope by its own terms. That's why it's such a dangerous political philosophy, right? And I try to make that point clear in the article, that Zionism is based on an idea that it's impossible for human beings to live together. It's only possible to live with security if you are dominating somebody else, right? And that this is an untenable position to take, right? But I agree with everything you sort of said, philosophically. The question is, how do you operationalize that in a politically effective way, given the constraints that we face? And that's all that's my lame defense, right, for something that's otherwise totally inappropriate. Now, finally, the other thing is, I wrote this in great haste in February of 2024. And I was writing like feverishly because I wanted to say something before and I still feel this, while there's still Palestinians around. Just yesterday, Smotrich was threatening the West Bank with exactly the same treatment, right? And so I felt like, maybe this is selfish on my part. I wanted to have something on the record, in which this is not acceptable for history, so that maybe in 50 years, law students will say, good God, how could this have happened? And finally, I'm extremely depressed about, pessimistic about the short term. However, no matter what the Zionists do to the Palestinians, the cause of Palestine will not die, because the cause of Palestine is the cause of all of humanity, in my opinion, right? The Israelis can kill every single Palestinian in Palestine, and the cause of Palestine will not die, right? And so that's the only, and maybe that's a stupid thing to think, but that's what I believe. And that's what sort of keeps me going. But I don't know, I agree with everything you say. It's totally inadequate, right? But anyway, there we go. But finally, we do have to have some sort of vision, no matter how implausible. The only thing that I would say in defense of that is, I believe that if the politics of the United States were to change, Zionism, the character of Zionism would change. The last 100 years that we've seen, or the last 125 years of Zionist fanaticism and violence, at every step in the way, it was reinforced by imperial powers. If it weren't for imperial powers, perhaps Zionism would not have evolved in this sort of way. That's why I think changing the domestic politics of the United States and European countries is so vitally important. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Okay, it's better. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Mohammad Fadel. Let me tell you why. When I read your article, I found it extremely important. I will go back to 1992, when I have a conversation with my professor, Alain Touraine, in France. In his seminar was telling that, what miracle Israel is did by receiving around 150,000 Russian Jews or Soviet Jews in that time during 1 year. So I raised my hand. I told him, but they come to become a settler in West Bank. So what miracle? It's like you French, your miracle of coming to Algeria. And he told me, look, Sari, you should not underestimate how the arrival of the secular Jews will change completely the landscape of Israel. Actually, in fact, it changed completely in a direction where, for the first time, we have a very secular, far right-wing political party, Israel Baytuna, which. So I was saying this so anchored idea that the problem, what went wrong, is this movement toward religious Zionism, while everything secular on Israel is no problem, etc. So I think the virtue of your paper, Mohammad Fadel, for me was this historical description, how historically, legally, and politically, the Zionism, they disregard the basic, vivid modus vivendi, and to engage, how to engage with the other you live with. And this is why I found it really very interesting. And I would change the title. I keep it exactly as it is, but the last, when you wrote the possible of just Zionism, to put a question mark, it means that is it really now there is a possibility of redeeming this liberal Zionism after so much disregard how to engage with the other, and with the basic rules of what is reasonable public reason with the other with whom you live. So if you like, I will finish here. The virtue of a Mohammad Fadel paper is historical, is to show us that what سامعيني هلا؟
Yes, great. Don't speak to the mic.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the virtue of this paper is to show us that historically it was it really can.
Muhammad, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, they say this.
So Muhammad,
Raise your voice.
yeah, the thing I don't get is that you make a very compelling claim, and the evidence you marshal in support, effectively, of the claim is almost unassailable. The analysis, the empirical work that you've done, brilliant. Even what you've just said just now, I don't disagree with a word you've said. The madness of this idea. The one thing that just doesn't make sense to me is your frame about trying to seek a just Zionism as opposed to something else. Have you at all considered that anti-Zionism is the right argument? That this mad idea cannot, indeed ought not, be redeemed, regardless of the tactical goal that you seek, which is effectively to alter policy where it matters in the metropole. And the reason why I say that is because there is an assumption that you have, if you want to proceed in the way that you do, that I think is a false one, based on the belief that the United States, where the power resides, and on which Israel is dependent, will forever engage in respect for and demonstrate a fidelity to liberal values. Take, for instance, Biden and Trump alone, and policy decisions that they've taken over the past 15, 16, 17 months. For all of the exhortation of the global community, including people like you and I, that the West needs to live up to its ideals, that the rule of law matters, that Rawlsian principles of liberal democratic governance matter, that equal rights matters, these people have stood bold-faced and said, in Biden's case, yes, we agree, and yet they persisted in their project of doing the Palestinians in. Or with Trump, he basically said, and in today's press conference or yesterday, a question was put to him, on what authority, the journalist asked Trump, on what authority do you propose to take over the Gaza Strip? And his response was not what one would expect if the United States cares about liberalism, which would have been the authority of the Palestinian people or the consent of the government. No, he said, on the authority of the United States. So the assumption that you have that making a plea to Rawlsian liberal politics in this sense, political liberalism, will produce a tactical victory with the powers that be on Capitol Hill, I think is faulty. And so that brings us back to the key point. Can there even be a just Zionism or a just Afrikaner nationalism or a just apartheid or a just Nazism? I suggest to you the answer is no. And in 2025, you can say the exact same thing you want to say and only properly just frame it, which is to say there is no place in the civilized world for Zionism. And these are the reasons why. Get on the freedom train or leave us be. And you might think that's tactically wrong. But what else do we have at this stage? We can't keep feeding the beast. We must center Palestine, not Zionists or Jews in this equation. I'm sorry.
Well, I think part of the issue here, maybe we're
this on. I share your assumptions. I'm also, an advocate of, or at least adherent to the Rawlsian framework of liberalism. But I want, and I share also what the requirements of liberalism involves in terms of equality of citizenship, regardless of ethnic identity. However, my question is, and I thought this is the spirit of your paper, although you seem to have retreated from this in a sense. The spirit of your paper is you want to present to the Israelis a framework. If they want to be truly liberal, they have to move to. And if they move to that liberal and they want still to have the label Zionist, then this would be a just Zionist if they accepted to move to a liberal framework. So in a way, I thought your assumption is that what kind of discourse we have to give, what kind of mirror we have to present to the so-called liberal Zionists to make them look at themselves and see they are not truly liberal, and therefore they might want to move to that liberal position if they want to have a just settlement with the Palestinians. That's the spirit. The audience for you are the Israelis, to that extent. Although it seems from the discussion that you sort of give up this hope. These are hopeless. Anybody who calls himself Zionist is hopeless. So you moved on that our audience now is not the Israelis, but the Americans. And a particular component of the Americans who are not part of the MAGA or who are, so the Northeast professors of law in the US. These are the only audience we have now. And we have through them to convert US and Israel into something else. I see this as nothing short of saying that we have to defeat them by force. And you yourself said, and I agree with you, that track has been tried and it's not succeeding. I don't see it succeeding in the future. So I don't think you should give up the idea that you have to convince the Israelis. That is the only project that is viable, is to talk to them. And I think one should not shy away from saying that by admitting too quickly that they are irredeemable. They are genocidal and irredeemable, and therefore should not talk to them. We should just defeat them. Go ahead, they've been tried. I don't think I see a prospect of that defeat, neither coming from us in our own agency, nor from the help of the West. And I think the only way is to push an argument that if you want to be minimally just, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And see what we can do on our side also to help that process. But I don't think we should retreat too quickly into the assumption that these are just genocidal crowds who have no sense of justice and therefore they are not worth talking to. That seems to be the assumption of discussion in this room, and I don't agree with that at all. Thank you.